Hello and welcome back to Thank You for Spore-ing, the podcast that encourages clickers. That's right. If you like this show, please be sure to click on that subscribe button. We are streaming on YouTube and everywhere that podcasts are found. I'm Eric Scull, and coming back this week, Chad Hopkins. Hey, Chad.
Hey, Eric. How's it going?
Good. I am so happy because we live in a world where this show, The Last of Us, is weekly, and we have another episode that we've just seen.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know about you. Well, actually, I do know about you. This is just banter. I have spent all week consuming additional information and like both of the Last of Us podcast episodes, and I rewatched the episode again on Friday night, and it's just like, okay, this is all I can think about, and I'm not mad about it.
I loved it. It's one might say it's consumed you like a fungus.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe no, but it's great to be
Watch out if I
texting during
twitch.
the week. Yeah, I'll try and keep an eye on that. But yeah, it's nice to be texting during the week and seeing what each other are watching. We're sharing links with each other. I didn't know about that bonus episode of the podcast, so thank you for sharing that. But yeah, there's been a lot of official kind of content, and one thing I wanted to do at the top of the show is actually talk about what it was in episode 1 that we either realized later or were corrected on by the extensive YouTubing that I know I found out a few things. I was like, oh, that actually makes more sense than what I thought. Because this is the place before we get into episode 2 to really talk about what we realized, because otherwise there's just no going back. So yeah. Before we get into that, though, I did want to say we now have on this show an official spoiler policy.
Yay.
I figured it was nice because last week I know I got a little bit ahead of where the show is using information from the game. And while it's not necessarily a problem, I had a friend go, oh, I knew she was going to die anyway because she wasn't a series regular.
Yeah, guest starring.
Yeah. So okay. But we may have spoiled the death of drumroll or character who died in episode 2, Tess. And so I thought it was important to just set the ground rule here. So moving forward, Thank You for Spore-ing. We'll be discussing each episode of HBO's The Last of Us after it airs in the US, and we will talk about the events depicted as well as comparing them to the equivalent scenes in the video games, but we will limit or try to limit as best we can the main discussion of our episode to plot elements that were changed or addressed for the television series, and we won't talk about future video game events that definitively have yet to occur on the TV show. So, in other words, we won't spoil the video game and thus spoil the show's likely plot trajectory in this season beforehand. But if we are at the same point in the video game and the TV show, we will absolutely be talking about both. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me. Yeah.
Nope, great. I know we agreed about it beforehand, so great. That works. And then the other component of that is at the end. So at the end of each of these aired episodes is this behind the scenes, and there's some looking forward type stuff. I assume we will want a spoiler full sort of predictions segment. So in case of that, we'll do that at the end of the show, and I'll put something in the show notes that says, spoiler talk after this point, and we'll say, everybody say goodbye if you don't want spoilers, just in case there are people out there.
Yeah, that'll be the section of the podcast that's for video game players and for people like Eric with the moth to the flame to the spoiler policies.
If this were a podcast that I was not making, I would be skipping right to that section going, okay, I already know all the other stuff. I already know how I feel about it. Let's go. Let's go. So Very exciting stuff. But let's get back to talking about the things that we didn't realize at first about episode 1 that we've since come to understand.
Well, first off, there was that character who I named as Zoe in our last episode because I couldn't remember her name. Her name is Kim, right?
Kim.
Yeah, Kim. Okay, just making sure I was remembering that
No,
again
great. I
correctly
love
the second time.
the correction. I didn't notice it. I couldn't find it when I looked up the cast list either, just as you had failed to. So great. Awesome correction.
I made sure to note that while watching the second time, and I still love that scene where she fully 180s and is like, okay, I'm in. This is what we need to do to save humanity, and it is willing to do anything and everything. So that was great. The only other standout moment of the episode that I hadn't particularly noticed the first time, at least I don't remember noticing it, was when Joel first remembers Sarah's death while the Fedra agent's gun is in his face at the end, and his lip trembles. And I didn't notice that moment of like just ultimate raw emotional vulnerability the split second before he rage monsters and beats the snot out of a guy. So that's
subtle, but effective.
Yeah, that's destroyed by that, but love that.
Oh, this show is going to destroy you. I can definitively say you were right. Yeah.
We had a couple more moments like that in tonight's episode. It's going to keep happening. I've accepted it.
Yeah. My big thing, and there were some really good comments overall from the creators on the official Last of Us podcast. They were able to talk about things like the theme that they're going for. Those episodes are always still like shorter than I would like them to be. You can tell they've also been very edited to like the most straightforward conversation versus what clearly must have happened. I mean, I know when we talk, it's like very organic, but anyway, I always want more out of each of these episodes. That said, there was a ton of good quotes. I think the one that stood out to me, which won't spoilerize anything, is that love triumphs all is the message they're going for with this show. But with the caveat that that's not always a good thing.
Right. I love that. And I have a few more moments from those podcasts that I'll sprinkle in throughout our discussion because of how they tie into episode 2. But I did love that in particular about how love is a powerful thing and that doesn't always mean good things.
They went on to say that racism and all the terrible things that humans do to each other might even also spring from love. Actually, they say it does, which I think is a very bold and claim. I would need weeks to just try and pick apart and understand better. But regardless, I found that to be really exciting. And, in terms of a correction, something that I thought happened last week when Sarah, Joel's daughter, is at the neighbor's house and she comes upon the older woman attacking her own family members. I thought when she was kind of biting maybe like the woman's neck or head area and looked up, I thought part of the woman's own hair was coming out of her mouth, that it was like because she was literally like just glomping on the woman's head. And it turns out that those were part of the fungus that is coming out of I didn't get that at all from my viewing. Now, granted, it was a darkened kitchen. There were no lights on. I'm blaming that. But that's a very specific infected thing that we are now, after episode 2, taught to really just look for as an indicator of somebody who is recently exposed.
Right. And for those of us who aren't experts in mycology, like the woman in Jakarta in this episode, that those strands are called mycelium, which is kind of what fungus is made up of. And so it's nice to have a word for that. And I really do like that change over the spores thing, which does make sense the way I think Mason in the behind the scenes at the end of today's episode said, spores being localized to one place and not spreading out as they would naturally happen doesn't really make sense in this kind of medium. And so that's a good change from the game, I think. And there's other good changes regarding infection and communication within the infection that I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yeah, so it wasn't hair. I'm actually a little disappointed because I was like, oh, they're just going for the gross thing because she was just... But no, it was supposed to be a zombie. It's shot as if it's this big zombie reveal, but I was just totally unfamiliar, unexpecting. So
yeah.
But yeah, we'll talk about more stuff as we go through the episode, but always good to touch base too on that. And there was a lot of stuff. I watched one of those videos that's like top 10 things you absolutely would have missed in the show, and I missed about 6 of them. So I always feel very informed. That's what I love about a global phenomena, or at least, a national, it's popular TV show that everyone is dissecting each week. Another video had like 92 Easter eggs from last week's episode. Spoiler alert, I don't think that 80 of them were actual quote Easter eggs, but they were observations that I nevertheless found pretty interesting. So there's all these videos on YouTube, and I would point to our fellow brethren in discussion here to go check that out for anybody who's interested in the show, because we are one of many. So without further ado, are you ready to talk episode 2 of The Last of Us?
I am ready. Let's do it.
I believe this episode was called Infected.
Yeah, that's right. And as far as just like initial overall thoughts from me, I think that this, so far, the 2 out of 9 episodes we've gotten continues to be a perfect adaptation. It's staying faithful to everything I love from the game, the elements of the game that matter the most, without it necessarily feeling beholden to the specific moments or specific story beats, like very specific. I mean, obviously the general arc appears to be the same. And so, as a fan of the game who has played the game multiple times and knows what is coming, I love seeing the small changes that surprise me, because that's what I want from an adaptation. As we talked about in our first episode on this, is that I don't want a carbon copy of the game in this TV medium. If I wanted a carbon copy, I mean, honestly, I would just play the game again. So I'm excited to see more of those differences.
I have played the game again since we last podcasted. I booted up good old Left Behind DLC because I
Nice.
wanted to remind myself what some of the story and character moments were, particularly as they pertain to Ellie. But we'll get into that later. I completely agree that the adaptation continues to actually impress and is to be very good. I think episode 2 really worked also to continue to introduce the world and its stakes. You need that kind of time spent explaining how the infected works in order to get that kind of buy-in for the audience. For a video game, it doesn't necessarily matter, because you just need to know what buttons to hit to get the shotgun out and make your mark and not die and have to restart the level. But in a game, I really appreciate the leaning into talking about what types of infected there are. And yeah, just in particular, as we left this episode on that dramatic downbeat, I thought this is really perfect at just continuing to set what the stakes are in the world and what this world is like. We lost, I've said already, Tess in this episode, and that is somebody who, could have been a series regular but was just a guest star, as it turns out. So although it happens quick in the game as well, the fact that it happened this soon in the show shows that nobody really is safe, and you're not really supposed to feel safe, I think.
I really enjoyed seeing more of Anna Torv in this episode as Tess. I mean, we got good parts of her in episode 1, but to have her more on the forefront here, and to let her almost be the main character in this episode in a lot of ways, I would say. I really appreciated her performance, and those final moments show how great an actress she is, I think. And I am excited to talk more about her as we continue.
Yeah, and the other big thing for me was that they did manage to sprinkle in a little bit of commentary on hope, a little bit there, particularly when Tess is telling Joel, why don't you for once believe that something could go right for us? Words to that effect. And I think that, Ellie really is a personification of the capacity for hope, or the potential for there to be something good happening for everybody coming forward. And I like the idea that the show is not all bleak. I tend to not gravitate towards media that can be seen as not hopeful. Granted, The Last of Us, I'm sure, will challenge that as the series continues to go on. I know I've played the games, but I like that for this moment, there's still some light, fun, and potentially hopeful aspects of it.
Yeah, and in regards to the adaptation of it, we get to see more of Ellie and how perfect Bella Ramsey is. I mean, some of those specific moments felt like those moments, and I don't want to just like make all of our discussion about comparing it to the game, but it was like the moments in the game where you're just walking around in between big set pieces or big action moments when Ellie, as you're controlling Joel, would say something about the environment. And I really love that stuff. I really did. I'm trying to think of specific examples. There's, I guess when she approached the piano, there was something that she said that I thought was really, really funny. And there were other moments where she's just got a good sense of humor and has the attitude of Ellie exactly right.
I completely agree. It feels different and yet exactly familiar.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that a lot of it is her talkativeness. A lot of it is the fact that she's willing to joke because she's kind of uncomfortable and she
Mm-hmm.
leans into the joke. But I think crucially, nobody else is joking with her at this stage because Joel spends most of the episode, Joel, who would potentially be her banter partner in the future, or be more openly warm, is still treating her as though she might turn any second. And so really what you get is Ellie who just powers through that kind of negative emotion toward her and nevertheless is nothing short of herself in every waking moment. And I think that that is spot on character from what we are familiar with, but also captured in a way that only a real person could do, in that it's all Bella. That's what she's creating for us.
Yeah, there's one moment that I did just remember where Joel calls her a weird kid, and he says, she responds, "You're a weird kid."
Like what?
It's like
Like
the perfect retort,
it's such a great, yeah, it's like
I've had those retorts back to my friends and family, and like
right, you
it's
just
perfect.
say the same thing.
Yeah.
It's the perfect retort every time. You just say whatever somebody said to you, be like, no, you are. It's just unbelievable. Yeah, part of the I guess the immaturity is what sells it, of that remark. So I'm glad we both like this show and haven't given up hope yet that it will entertain
Yeah.
us.
It would have put a damper on our plans to talk about every
It would have
episode if we
just
didn't
been
like
like,
it.
yeah, yeah. So much for that show. But let's get into walking through episode 2. Past the overview, we're going to go more or less scene by scene, more or less chronologically. We already talked about some of the standout moments, but I I think I'm still a little low key floored that we received in the beginning of this episode like another insight into Outbreak Day and the initial outbreak of the cordyceps infection in the scene that took place, or scenes that took place in Jakarta in the opener. I was actually thrilled, and I hope this also isn't the first flashback we'll get in the future. But in the game, it was kind of just Sarah's flashback in the beginning and very little peppered throughout.
I love that they're doing this. I love that it's something completely new and they start off with it each episode. I hope that continues. Like, and so
Yeah,
far it's chronological too. Like, I think I'm trying to remember the exact year of the opening scene from the first episode, like 1968 or something like that.
that's right.
And then 2003 in this one. So maybe the next episode could be about Joel, something about his journey to Boston or his early time in Boston, or I don't know exactly what to hope for, and I don't want to make predictions about that specifically, but I would love to get more of these kind of flashbacks, and who knows, maybe that's when they'll put in some of the Left Behind stuff. Is we'll get those flashbacks at the beginning of the episode, and then boom, we're woken up in the reality of today.
Yeah.
Um, but that Jakarta scene was absolutely heartbreaking. It was a nice callback to a small moment from the first episode when they're eating breakfast at Joel's
Yep.
home in the kitchen, and it mentions Jakarta on the radio. And they're like, "Is Jakarta a country? Where's that at? Is it in Asia?" And Sarah's the intelligent one in the family and says, "No, Jakarta is the capital of what, Indonesia, I think."
Doesn't Tommy say, "Oh, there's hope for us yet," and
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
in Sarah, like our children are our future. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So it
I
was nice to have that callback to the first episode, and we get to see what exactly was going on in Jakarta and sort of see this almost as a ground zero in some respect. And the absolute heartbreak that came as we are witness to this professor of mycology being called in for her expert opinion, and the desperation in her eyes as she realizes what has happened, the horror in the military person's eyes when she suggests unhesitatingly, "You have to bomb this place." And then the tears as she, after recommending that the city be bombed to avoid spreading this infection, the tears in her eyes as she says, I want to go back to my family. She's not asking to escape this. She knows that this is like the end of her. This is the end of her family. This is the end of Jakarta. And hopefully that's the end of this disease. But obviously we know better.
The thing is, this is such an extreme solution. They're still thinking, and may continue to think for quite some time yet, that they can control or contain this fungus without resorting to bombing a city of people. That's a war crime. They'd be wrong about containing it, but the suggestion fully conveys the gravity of the and the desperation and the absolute severity of what has occurred, because this professor knows what is now going to unfurl now that cordyceps has mutated and there are people at large who are infected. I just loved everything about the scene between her and the officer where he ran her through kind of, there are 14 people missing that worked at that. Was it a grain and wheat processing plant?
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that. So I also just love the very specificity of all of that, because as we've come to learn, as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, people do yearn for a patient zero or like an explanation of what point of origin, where was this first seen? That kind of a thing is like a question you'd want answered about any global pandemic. So I think that was very satisfying just from a person who's experienced a real life pandemic to be like, oh, I now have a start date. We now have, the 1968 in the last episode was portentous and it was very foreshadowing, but somewhere in Jakarta, something evolutionarily sprung forth. But yeah, the bombing, we see that was eventually what people did do. And Tess explains that to Ellie as they're walking through the bombed out remains of Boston, Massachusetts. It's so thrilling to me to see that, probably way too late, that this professor, whose character name is Ibu Ratna, was eventually taken seriously. And it's also devastating when you realize that there's that natural hesitation, but she was probably exactly right. And they did end up doing it. And as Tess later says, perfect characterization here. It worked in some places and
Right.
others it didn't.
That whole opening scene feels like a commentary by the showrunners about the need for preemptive research and study. Now, in this specific case, it's unknown like what they could have done, because the whole point was that fungus couldn't live within a host because it couldn't survive the warmer temperatures. But between 1968 and 2003, you've got 30 plus years where something could have been studied in regard to, like, if this was to happen, how could we react? Is there some sort of way we could curb the infection without resorting to warfare? Is there some way we could create some kind of vaccine or some sort of inhibitor? It seems maybe that nothing was done to lean towards those preventative measures, and they're commenting on like, well, this is the result. Like, what can we see in our world where if we don't do something now to prepare for its eventual possible outcome, what are we going to do? Like,
I understand what
that feels like a commentary to me.
I agree. I understand what you're saying, and I think casting it, taking into account the 1968 stuff from the first episode, which was sort of also felt like commentary, and also felt like, global warming is going to screw us in the end, although it already is in millions of ways. Here's another way it could. The prophetic kind of opening scene of episode 1 now makes you ask the question, when it comes to outbreak time and we're in Jakarta with this professor of mycelial study, mycology, why wasn't something done? In fact, it was predicted with alarming detail that this sort of thing was plausible, or at the very least, very, very, very possible should major environmental factors change. So why did nothing get done as like an accusatory kind of,
right?
There's like a negative charge to Well, we didn't know about this because when I see this scene in Jakarta, I'm like, this just came out of nowhere. Nobody is prepared for this. That's why the only solution is to bomb it, because there's absolutely no preparation that could have gone into this because it was so unforeseen. But that's proven wrong by the fact that it was actually heavily postulated in the last episode.
Yeah, and you know what? That's maybe what John Hannah's character from that opening scene in episode 1 was saying. He wasn't saying that it's not possible for us to have a cure or a vaccine or a way to prevent this. It's him saying that it might be possible if we put in the work, if we put in the research, if we work on it starting now, but he knows that nothing was going to be done. And that's why the measures, when it finally does happen here in 2003, are instantly desperate.
I think she realizes they're already too late, especially because their patient zero is in fact, was bitten by a human, so therefore isn't patient zero. It's just the first
Exactly.
that, yeah. And so that also represents the fact that it is just out of hand, and already too far gone, which is nuts. But I just love the tension. I love the scene, these unknown characters to video game players perfectly again set up what it is that has occurred in this world. And yeah, I want more.
Me too. I'm looking for more of these prequel scenes. Prequel's the wrong word, but these flashback scenes, and I hope they continue to surprise me because I don't know what to expect next.
I was thinking they were done, but now that you're saying this, I'm really, really giddy hopeful that each episode does start the way you're thinking, with like a substantial flashback, a scene, or something that takes place around the time of the mass outbreak. I really want that.
Yeah, like maybe one of them could be like the first United States reactions to this happening. Like I don't know. I'm again, I don't want to speculate because I don't want to
Yeah, we'll
accidentally
save
get it
that for
right and
the
not
end of
be
the show too.
surprised.
Yeah, yeah.
But
Well, and
yeah,
to be surprised.
yeah.
But we got a little bit of it on the radio when Tommy was driving last episode, but that may be, the talk about going in the city.
Uh-huh.
And Sarah was worried that she'd be infected because she had been in the city. So I think that maybe some of that has been communicated or will be in the future. But I'm all in. I want to see who was well, we know who was president at the time. Made an appearance last week. But yeah, I want to see more scenes like that. Let's talk about the next scene. So sort of following the Jakarta, we're back in 2023, Boston, and it's this beautiful shot. I believe at first overhead of
Mhm.
Ellie coming to.
I really like that scene, and you can see the look on her eyes at first, thinking maybe I was abandoned. I messed up. They saw my bite mark. They don't trust me. They left me here. But then as she slowly turns and observes her environment, the reveal of Joel and Tess just sitting there, gun in hand, like we're waiting for the twitch.
There's
uh,
almost no point to us texting during watching because I fear I distract you, or like we'd both miss something. If I text you to react to a scene that we're both watching at the same time, we're both distracted when we could taking it all in, and we're going to talk about it immediately after. That said, I couldn't resist texting you going, this is my favorite thing of all time right now. Just Ellie waking up and Joel's got a gun on her. Yes. And Joel and Tess are just waiting, like you said. Oh, it's so good.
yeah, I like their trepidation. I like how on edge Joel is. And, something that was talked about in the podcast is how Tess is the one in charge between Joel and Tess, and she knows how to sort of assuage his rage and to keep him in check, and say the right things so that he doesn't overreact to a situation. But to have him there on edge and her sitting behind him, he's the one nervous and in charge in this moment, because the second Ellie makes the wrong movement, it's all over for her.
Yeah. And they are doing something really interesting with the characterization of Joel and Tess, and their
Hmm.
relationship. It is changed, but I couldn't say how. It's different and more layered and more interesting, but I also couldn't necessarily pinpoint how. Unfortunately, with Tessa's passing, maybe we won't get necessarily more insight into that, but it seems like you could read it in many different ways. The way that she was assuaging his rage in the last episode could also be read as if she were like babying him in a way,
Yeah.
like this is not our focus, focus, have more focus, versus in the video game they were like a little bit more equals. But
It
I don't mind sort of this change. I genuinely don't, but I wish we had more time to explain why or in what ways she is more the leader and how that has benefited the both of them in their time together.
it feels like he's emotionally stunted.
It does a little
Like
bit, yeah.
developmentally, the moment that Sarah was killed, something was cut off, and his only emotions are like
Primal.
outright rage or just like normal living. Like there's no in between, it seems. And so she is that in between for him in helping to calm him down, to focus maybe his anger on the right things and not the wrong things. And so I noticed that in episode 1, especially after rewatching or while rewatching after listening to that podcast episode, and then noticing it more and picking up on those little moments where Joel is on the edge, but because Tess says no, let's follow through with this. This is the next logical step. Trust me, this girl might be what she claims to be. And Joel listens to her because they have that relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. So and given that the way that we're reading this, and I agree with everything you said. I think that's probably exactly what we're supposed to read into it. Now that Joel doesn't have that person to explain sort of the adult rational side of things, or remind him to hope, now that he's without her, we might actually get a front row seat to how stunted this characterization of Joel may be, and how he may be shown to be quite deficient in some of the key areas that border adult reasoning and anything less than primal. He might really be a monster. We just don't know him enough yet. Right now, we see him as a guy who was a good dad, who thinks kids, even now, thinks kids are kind of funny. But really, we don't know him, and there wasn't a lot of opportunity to see that guy that threw the kid on the fire in the last episode either, because this was very much a walk and talk sort of episode, and they had to focus on everything that was going on. But I want to learn more about his damage, and I think we'll have a lot of time in the future to explore just what it is with Joel, and also who he is now that we don't have Tess anymore.
Yeah, I think I'll have more to say about all of that specifically later, but for now, I think that, I mean, obviously, when he beat that guy's his face to pulp at the end of the previous episode, we saw exactly the word you used was primal, and I completely agree with that. It's just like unchecked rage. In that moment, the only thing he knows is his fist to the other guy's face, and that's the only thing he can do.
Do we think he killed him?
Probably. I can't imagine he didn't. And even at the beginning of this episode, he's like flexing his hand because it hurts, because he probably just broke his hand against this guy's nose bone and cheekbone. And like this guy, I don't know, maybe he lived.
If
but
I were hit that hard, I wouldn't want to live.
No, I think minimal at minimum that guy at least has brain damage, but I don't think he survived. I think the whole
Yeah.
point is that Joel was unleashed and that guy was in the way.
The reason I ask is because I want to start a death count of there are counts online of how many people you kill in any video game, really, I think. So let's compare it with the TV series. So Joel Miller, ting, one. Maybe I'll have a sound effect like a cash register going off.
Oh,
One
no.
dead. I'm not counting the zombies though, that or the infected. That's too much.
Okay, so we're counting
human deaths.
Joel killing other people.
Joel and Ellie and anybody else that
Okay.
kills. Yes.
Okay, so it's a total death count. Okay.
A death count of, well, no, individual maybe. Let's do. So how many people does Joel himself kill that are not infected? because
Okay.
and the reason that I want to focus on that specifically is the question of his morality.
Yeah.
Killing an infected person, we've seen, I mean, even the doctor at the beginning said that's pretty much what you have to do. But if they're not infected, if they're just kind of coming at you or they're a barrier to your livelihood or personal success, that calls into question the lengths in which you're willing to go to survive. So that's the count I'll be keeping.
Okay.
Very
Let's
well.
do it.
So here is oh damn. One sec. What was I thinking? Uh Joel and Ellie, or Joel and Tess. We'll move on. I lost it. As they get out of the indoor area that they're in, and many, many, many jokes, including Ellie asking for a gun, and when they deny her, she'll say, "I'll just throw the sandwich at them." Um, very funny stuff. And I also really liked the opportunity to see the bombed out city of Boston during the daytime. It's actually a very nice day, and a good opportunity to reflect on the world. They get to know each other better. Particularly, Tess asks Ellie about herself, and she also asks them questions about them. It was a nice, although everyone's still guarded, it was a nice, slowly getting to know you more set of scenes.
Yeah, I really liked the interaction between Ellie and Tess, especially in those moments, because Joel was not keen to interact with Ellie as much as
Yeah,
possible.
yeah.
But the discussion about how Ellie was infected in the first place, and Ellie references things from the Left Behind DLC about exploring the mall and about the infected just sort of sneaking up on her. She didn't even know they were there. And of course, she doesn't mention a certain person from the Left Behind DLC who was there with her. Although maybe, I don't know, maybe you should cut that out because it's kind of a spoiler.
Well, no. What
But
I'll say is that person was mentioned last week's episode. So
yes,
there's
so
that. It's like,
right.
hey,
But because Ellie leaves out that key detail to Tess, Tess is like, man, you've got some balls.
yeah,
Yeah, you're brave. Yeah.
yeah, an interesting relationship between the two of them. But it also just reminded me of what we were saying about Joel too. I love the way you put it. He's not keen to interact with her. Obviously,
Hmm.
we the audience need to get to know those two characters better. So it's just as well that they talk to each other. But Tess is the driving force in this because she really does believe in Ellie. I think there's something that is inherently there. And Joel isn't ready to warm to her because his trauma. Like we all understand, I think at this point, his not wanting to warm to this kid or also anybody
Right. I
because
was about
they're
to say that. He doesn't want to warm up to anybody. I think Tess is an anomaly in his life.
I think that's exactly right. These relationships, and I'm sure we'll see much more of them, are all transactional in nature. And the only person who seemingly got close since Sarah's death was Tess.
Hmm.
So yeah, I like that she's taking the lead on questioning Ellie, and there's a mutual kind of respect there that develops.
I like that bond. It's two badass women. I mean, we don't know how badass Ellie is at this point, if at all, but I mean, she's definitely got the attitude to match Tess's. And so it's like a good pair, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Um,
And in this moment of the show, we are exploring the outside area of Boston, and they make it through, I guess it's the hotel. And they look out, and we see the horde of infected all in one place, which we never saw that many infected all in one place like that in the games. And that is so much scarier knowing that that is out there. And it's additionally scary considering how, I mean, Ellie reveals how smart she is once again. She says, "Oh, look, they're moving together. They're communicating with each other."
oh God.
And she instantly picks up on that, just like she picked up on the codes in the previous episode. Um, I love that we got to see like, oh crap, there there are a lot of infected out there. They group think. We have our work cut out for us in getting to this place.
It's so funny because and I know I messaged you before the episode started. I was looking up a particular villain from Last of Us Part 2 or a particular let's say creature that I think this episode totally foreshadows in a huge unexpected way. If there was any question whether whatever it is I'm talking about is going to come to light, hell, I think it has to now, and there
Terrifying.
may be more than one. So the other thing that, and I think it's safe to say, um this is not strictly how the you've already said this, how the infection is shown to spread in the game, and this was touched on at the behind the scenes moment. This may exist in the games, but we haven't seen it. The fact that in the show it's called out as being these strands that run even through the ground, can run up to a mile away and have the connection and have the, and fungus in the real world in the forest do this for miles. They send chemical signals and they live. It's a living and breathing organism that's miles long. If you can just imagine that, and the fact that this group of infected that once were human are now something like that, it immediately becomes so much more terrifying, like you said.
Yeah, it completely changes the stakes and the danger at hand for everybody because in the game it's all just like, well, you got to activate stealth mode and make sure you don't step on any piles of glass and
Yeah,
that kind of stuff. But for the danger here to be like, if you step on the wrong thing a mile away, an infected is going to come and hunt you out and kill you. That is terrifying.
that's
And
worse. Yeah,
yeah,
that's
it's worse. And it especially when you're traveling with a child who doesn't have experience with this kind of stuff and doesn't know the full extent of the danger, although by the end of this episode she might. um
yeah.
it's just, wow, this is a scary thing. And it's such a great change.
Yeah, I agree. I do find it, however, reminiscent of the way that in the games the runners swarm. That was
Hmm.
something that it's called out in the end of the behind the scenes that packs of them, and it just makes sense. Like runners always kind of, that what makes them more dangerous too is the fact that there's just a ton of them at once. But that really canonizes and solidifies and gives further explanation as to why there are groups of them, in that they are kind of growing together in, to quote Tess, more ways than you know.
Right, yeah. To it having the infected still around, it's like you have desperate people out there who are still searching for places to be. And you see in the previous episode that there were people who were executed for sneaking into or out of the quarantine zone. And sneaking into the quarantine zone is the scarier thing, because these are just people who need safety and are trying to escape the dangers of the world, whether infected or otherwise. And for them to not be able to go to the quarantine zone for fear of being executed and to have to turn to finding shelter in these cities, it's it's interesting that there's still so many infected in the city like this because of situations like that 20 years later.
Yeah, and just watching Joel check the fungal strand or whatever in front of the Bostonian Museum is like new to us as players and very enthralling and very like, clearly he does have some survival skills and that's supposed to help him. No, it used to be if you're out of an earshot of a clicker, you're fine, right? But now this is even worse because of these strands, these little miles long connection points. And when Joel shoots the guy at the state house later, and it brings on the swarm, I don't know that they heard the bullet. It's literally that he stepped on, or he traipsed on this strand.
Well, yeah, well, the guy he shot, his hand landed on the fungus and the tendrils came up and touched, and then you saw the infected mile or however far away, the same tendrils pop up, and it's like, hey, there's something going on over at this place. And
Visual storytelling, very
yeah, yeah,
continuity, nonverbal, very good stuff. That stuff moves too fast for me.
yeah.
Can
It's
can this
funny.
just slow down?
It's funny seeing that kind of communication used in this way here when, like we just got the new Avatar, The Way of Water
I
movie,
haven't
and
seen.
Awa. Well, I just mean like the Avatar universe in general on Pandora. It happened a lot in the first movie where the forest is one big living organism. Awa is all these creatures and plants and everything connected into one. And there's even the moment at the end of that movie where because the human bad guys are coming to destroy the Na'vi, the Awa, the forest, sends nature to attack in addition to the natives. And so we see it used defensively there, but for the good guys. And here we see it defensively against anybody who is not infected, so that they can continue to propagate.
This is all of a sudden M. Night Shyamalan's The Happening.
Right. It's funny. I also just watched an episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender. Funny.
Which you have a
where they were at a
podcast
swamp.
on.
I do. They have a swamp. There's a swamp that they visit, and they talk about the swamp just being one tree that has spread out over miles, and it all communicates with each other.
The closest human analog is the trivia fact that the largest organ in the human body is the skin.
Yes, it is.
And to think of the skin as an organ like you would the heart, the lungs, the kidney is crazy, but it's scientifically fact, and that's what it is. So the idea that all of these little skin cells and the many layers of your skin that you're maybe familiar with when you get a cut and how it all heals and closes up is similar, at the very least, to these strands and the network of communication that's happening between the cells of these infected. So very crazy stuff, but the time we spent, I think, was valid because this is totally new to both players and viewers of the show.
As we're approaching the Boston Museum, I wanted to take a moment to once again praise the set design and the environments that they've created for this show. For a moment, as they first enter there's the hotel lobby from slightly earlier where I thought that they might be giving us the first Ellie hop on this raft sequence because you can't swim, which would have been fun. But
I didn't see any pallets in the background. Maybe they were putting them there.
Yeah, maybe it'll come in like a future episode because this was shallow water. She didn't need the pallet for this one.
Yeah.
But then as we get into the Boston Museum, there's little details, like there's a portrait of George Washington, I assume, on the wall that's half covered in fungus, and that's a nice touch. And I mean,
while we're praising the set design and you talk about things being covered in fungus, the restaurant with the table that's all moss.
That was so good.
It's so good.
Yeah, like the tendrils of the tablecloth still sitting around, and it was good.
It was so good. Yeah, I completely agree.
And it shows the sort of suddenness that this all happened with. It's like there were table settings that were still there. There were people who died sitting at the desk in the hotel because, I mean, like all of a sudden this all just happened and hell was unleashed, and it was just left that way for the last 20 years.
Yeah, it's a moment frozen in time, essentially, that I think they would do well to keep showing stuff like that. You know, people leaving in a haste. We did get a shot of all the cars on the highway now beneath the underpass where they were walking. Life just stopped. Civilization just stopped. People have gone on, but life as we knew it is gone and has been for a long time, and it was in the wink of an eye.
And then we have talked about infected in this episode, and we have mentioned clickers, but gosh, we need to talk about the way the clickers are perfect. They are terrifying. And, you know, it's like from the movement to the sound that they make to just like the way they look, it's terrifying in every regard. And then in the behind the scenes video at the end of the episode, Craig Mazin said that the clickers were actors that were fans of the games. And they were like, hey, I know how clickers work. Let me be this clicker thing. And so the people who are acting as the clickers played the game and are like, yeah, I'm going to instill this fear in other people that was first instilled in me while playing. And I just love that this is a series made by fans of the game, from Druckmann being a fan of the work of his studio to Mazin being a fan of the game to everybody else who's involved being so passionate for what they're doing here.
I gotta say, I'm a little jealous or nervous that I'm not a big enough fan because I haven't tried to recreate the clickers motor movements myself. I haven't tried to recreate. I mean, Bella Ramsey does a damn good job, but I haven't tried yet to make the noises or the twitchings of, the infected as a show of my fanhood. I've started a podcast, or two, and we've done a number of episodes at this point talking about the series, but I've never tried to recreate trying to be a clicker, and I don't know that that's how I would express myself, but these people, damned if they're not so good at it, and also like got to where they needed to go, where they wanted to go, and perfectly brought these things to life, in addition to the prosthetics and all the other people we heard from at the end of the episode.
Can you imagine being on set when they filmed that? I really hope that when they were filming this, they had the clicker sound effects, because if I was Pedro Pascal or Bella Ramsey sitting in that room with this thing looming just on the other side of this cabinet and I hear that noise, I don't think I'd be acting at that point.
No, I mean, they probably all were like, if not speaking English, be like, yoo-hoo. There's going to be like a lot of very funny outtakes, because there are people in there. Are you caught up on Stranger Things? Is that a show that you've watched?
Yeah.
So there's that scene where or there's that famous photo that came out after season 4 aired with the big bad from season 4 in the makeup chair, and
right,
just with
just
like
looking at his phone,
a straw, or he's looking at his phone, or it's all of that, where anybody who has to sit in 8 hours of makeup, they have to eat, they have to drink, so they're fed through like a straw, and you just see them with like a regular takeout cup, like a regular like paper or wax cup from McDonald's, and just having their beverage for the day. I fully expect to like start to see those, like I want to meet the clicker actors. I want to know them by name. I want them to like be very comedic and just start having videos where they talk about being in the while they look like a clicker. It's going to be so good.
Oh, that would be awesome. I wonder how much their actual speech would be inhibited from the prosthetics. Like, I don't know how well the mouth of the clicker actually like aligns with their own mouth, but still,
Funnily enough,
it's a really cool look, and
I
they did
wonder
a
how they
perfect
can
job.
see. I wonder how they can see. I really wonder, because the
That's
whole thing
true.
is clickers can't see, but the fungus would cover where their eyes would go. So what did they do to allow for that level of coordination?
Maybe they did
Um,
some sort of mascot or masked singer effect where there's that like slight haze in front of the eye sockets that they can see through, and then they just any glimpse of it not looking fully opaque, they fix it in post production.
Yeah, probably. I mean, that'd be the thing to do, because these clickers move, darn it. They are so agile and thin people to begin with. But the way that they move actually interests me for kind of a question, because as we're introduced to these clickers, I also am surprised by their strength. There are plenty of moments where, unlike in the game, I think, where my predominant fear is being scratched or bitten, and they kind of come at you and wave arms, they seem to do a lot more of throwing and a lot more of like putting their body weight down on Joel in particular as he's running from them. And I was like, wow, actually, I almost thought, where did these clickers get their strength from? But I think it's just that they're meant to be terrifying in general.
Right. And I mean, we saw it was in that museum on the first floor, there was the guy who had freshly been killed. And we are then led to believe, because there's clickers in this building, that it was the clickers who killed him in this way.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I need to pay closer attention to that wound. I know Ellie was freaking out about it. And Joel and Tess both said that it wasn't an average kill.
Hmm.
But I failed to see in the moment exactly how it was special. But the clickers are everything. They're so, so, so good. And they were foreshadowed a little bit earlier when Ellie said, is it really true that these things are blind and find their way around like bats? And to that, Joel and Tess got silent. They didn't say, yeah, it's true. It would have been too light if they had said, yeah, it's true. The fact that they didn't say it, and then you meet those creatures for real, and you're like, no, this really exists in this world, is so much more effective.
Right. And
And
then Joel hinted towards something even bigger and scarier when he references some infected that have been around for going on 20 years. And I don't think we're led to believe that it's the clickers that have been around that long. So there's something else coming. I mean, we know what it is. We know what it is. We've mentioned it before. There's even a glimpse of a figure of one in the behind the scenes moments. But
But we
yeah,
have our
that's
new spoiler policy in place. Darn it. That said, um, really the Bostonian Museum, another scene directly from the game. It feels down to the cabinets, and I feel like that benefits from they probably went to the real if it is a real place, they went to the real place to begin with when they wrote the game and were designing the game, and then subsequently probably maybe even filmed in the real place. It just feels like, I mean, it's so amazing the way that it really feels like the level I spent hours trying to beat. Well, 15 minutes for me and probably 7 days for you on grounded mode.
Not quite that long. I did beat The Last of Us Part 2 in a weekend, just like you did.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Just a lot harder. It's the Ginger Rogers thing backwards and in heels is like, you took the hard path, my friend, and I will never stop admiring you for it. Given the grounded comparison I just made, what did you feel about Joel's accuracy, weapon accuracy during that scene? For me, it left something to be desired. And for
just
you,
a little bit.
Yeah, wouldn't it be a disaster if you're playing grounded mode and you fired as poorly as he did? Wouldn't you have died?
First off, I don't have that many bullets.
What did he have, like 10?
Yeah, he had plenty.
Yeah.
He had 2 pocketfuls.
Oh, plenty is enough. Plenty. You already know that plenty is more. If he didn't run out and was actually screwed, he's better off than you were.
Right. No, I mean, I jest because obviously I am not a person within the video game. I am not a person in a real world setting under real danger. But I told you I was frustrated because I was just like, Joel, if you take 0.2 seconds longer to actually aim the gun at the clicker's head, like 1, maybe 2 headshots will finish the job. But that's the way you have to play on those harder difficulties. It's like, I mean, you don't have enough bullets to waste on knocking out legs or shoulders. It's like you aim for the head or you better just restart the level.
Yeah, there were a couple of torso shots he was making, and when he would aim for a head, it would miss. But I don't know that this is. I'm sure there's probably somebody out there in the internet going, that was character assassination. Joel would absolutely have hit that thing in the head right to start. I think it's way too soon to suggest that. I think the reason that his shot may have sucked in this episode a little bit is strictly to convey how threatening the clickers are. Because if he had dispatched them with a single gunshot to the head, like it's the golden gun or something, a single kill, then I don't think clickers would have worked as well. He has to miss. He has to be a little shaken, because clickers really are the most consistent thing at the top tier of difficulty that you're going to encounter during this season. I think it's safe to believe regularly clickers are at the very top of that pyramid. And so to see Joel struggle, at least at first, is important. But in the future, I would like to see him actually get through them a little better.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that there are definitely going to be those other scenes that will mimic the game's stealth mechanics, because that's like largely what you do in the game is stealth. And there's got to be moments where, oh, look, I have found a sniper rifle. I can take some of these out before I approach the environment from a distance, and I'm going to be much safer for it. And I think in those kind of instances, when Joel has a second to take a breath and to steady himself, he's going to prove how capable he is, because we've already been given hints to how capable both him and Tess were, and how they are able to replace a full team of Firefly members in transporting Ellie to where she needs to go.
Right, and succeed where they failed.
Exactly. Like your reputation precedes you. I can trust you with this task that I was previously going to send an entire battalion to do.
Yeah, and the final comment I have about Joel's poor shot, which it just humors me to no end that we're talking about like him missing, but you really don't get to survive after 20 years and not be a good shot. Right. Especially if you're Joel, who did not stick to the quarantine zone. Joel has been places and seen things. We can infer that just from his general competence and the fact that he's smuggled things out of the city before. So that's the part where I can see it becoming a problem if it were to continue, that we have to believe that Joel survived intentionally and not by accident. He's not Harry Potter, who never studied and still won every test ever. Joel has to earn it. And so I think we should start to see him be more effective at dispatching the infected in general, just in general.
I agree, but also to counter that just slightly before we move on, you could also make the argument that Joel has lasted this long for 20 years because he has specifically avoided these specific situations where he knew there were going to be clickers involved and his odds of survival were a lot lower. So, yeah, he's probably killed lots of infected. He says he has. I believe that.
Yeah.
And uh, he's probably very capable in the right situation, but he wouldn't have been here in a normal situation and putting himself in this danger. He's only there out of necessity for getting Ellie where she needs to go. And I think he's effective, but I think he's also smart and is smart enough to not put himself in unnecessary danger.
I think that's perfectly valid. And I'll be a little self-deprecating. He still shot better than I do. After how many years I've played this game, and for more footage, I will never upload myself playing The Last of Us because no, I won't. I just won't do it because I am a terrible shot. It is a miracle that I went through normal difficulty and actually completed the game because I waste so many bullets trying to get the head. And when I shoot the body, it's never in any of the important areas. And I waste so many bullets on these things. And
yeah. I rewatched the episode with one of my best friends the other night, and he likes video games, but he doesn't have the thumb skill either. And he was asking about this game because he's never played it and only knew like the very minor specific talking points about a few things in this game. And so he was like, so is this something I could play? And I was like, well, yeah, I mean, there's various difficulty levels. You can play it on story mode if you just want to get the story and you'll be fine. Or you can maybe put it up to the next highest difficulty after that if you want a little bit of challenge. But anyways.
I love the idea of somebody being in the room with you and asking you about the game because again, hard, like grounded, but difficult. I don't understand like the things you have seen and the things you have had to do to survive and actually complete the game in the same amount of time I was taking. I can't believe I just can't. I just don't. I can't understand how you do it. But you're so much better at it than I am. So very cool stuff. Moving into the wrap up of episode 2, because the Bostonian Museum sets off a chain of events that lead us directly to the end. We find that interestingly, Ellie has been, I guess, reinfected, or it seemed more like a scratch than a bite on her same wrist at her same old wound. I thought that was really interesting as a thing that happens because it reasserts in almost a very important way that Ellie is not a ticking time bomb.
Well, especially because we see that Tess, unfortunately,
Yeah.
is injured and has been infected as well, and so it reinforces Ellie's immunity to see that she and Tess were both, quote, infected at the same time, but to see how fast Tess's spreads and actually takes root in her body versus how Ellie's is just like, yeah, it's just a scratch. It is a more powerful way to show Joel this is the real deal and we have to follow through.
The one line that exists in the game that I wish were in the TV show, and there's so many lines that make it completely verbatim. There is that line where Tess says mine is already worse than Ellie's. She points to it, you're meant to infer it, but I don't think the line is in the show. And I was like, oh, that really would have clinched, that really would have sold it to me that, yeah, look, I mean, the infection's worse, but I can see with my eyes. I mean, you could tell that Tess was already more affected. So
Right.
We get into this hero's death of Tess's and the idea that they're fighting the infected versus a militant, group of people. I'm sure we'll get to that later, but is very effective. And Tess dies a real hero's death. And we see both Joel and Ellie react to it after it's all done. The best part about it for me was she seemingly actually gets all of them.
Right. Her arc here is so great because, everyone has done things that they regret, but in such desperate times as these and in such a dangerous profession as hers and Joel's, the profession of smuggling, when it's illegal to enter and exit the quarantine zone without authorization, I'm sure that her and Joel's sins are so much greater than most other people's. And we know that they've killed tons of infected who were people, and I'm sure that they've killed tons of actual people too. And so for her to have these sins that she looks back on her life, when Joel says before he knows that she's been infected, we just got to go home. Like, this is an effed mission, and there's no way we're going to be able to keep going. Here's fireflies that have all been killed. Um, we've got to go back home. And her retort is, that isn't my home. And on face value, she's saying, I'm not from Boston. Where does it? Joel says that she was from Detroit. So we learned that she was from Detroit. But really, I think it's also her saying that who she has become isn't who she actually is, that she wants to find some of her previous self in her actions, and for this to be something that matters. And she has a fantastic quote where she says, "Save who you can save." And I love that so much. There's a quote that is often attributed to Voltaire, I think, although I don't know how valid that is, that says, "Every man is guilty of the good he did not do." And I love that so much. And that is
Oh,
exactly what that quote is to me. Save who you can save. Like, if you can save somebody, you have the moral obligation to do it, especially considering the dark and twisted things that we have done in our lives to protect ourselves. And so now that they have this opportunity where Ellie seems to be a real hope and a real possibility for saving the future of mankind, Tess is going to do everything she can to redeem herself with this ultimate sacrifice action, so that Joel and Ellie can push on and hopefully end the nightmare of these last 20 years.
I love that. And it really puts into perspective for Joel too that Tess is gone. She cannot be saved. And
Mm-hmm.
but Ellie still can. And it's really like a refocusing of his perspective for her to point him in the right direction of, well, you can't save me, but you can still save this girl.
Right.
Save who you can save. Um Really just a great goodbye. The other outburst that where she says, I don't ask you for things, Joel. I don't ask you to feel how I feel. Again, that little bit of insight into what maybe transpired with them as people romantically as adults over the last 20 years or however long they've known each other is extremely exciting, and I want to know all the things about it, but this might be all we're getting. It just felt real. It felt lived in. It felt deep in a way that the video game couldn't ever be. And her line, "We are not good people, Joel," in the video game has been totally relocated in the best way in this episode. The way she explains to Ellie that they are not good people is so much more effective, I think, in the coolest of ways.
And with Tess gone now, it goes back to what we were talking about with Joel's stinted emotional behavior. Like, her loss at the end is more tough because not only is Joel losing his partner, romantic partner, work partner, partner in whatever other ways we haven't seen, he's also losing his only emotional connection at this point in time and the voice of reason to keep his apparent rage in check. And so, as we already talked about, we don't know what this means for Joel going forward as far to how he's going to react to the environments around him, to react to other wrongs against him, whether it's Ellie or whether it's other people or whether it's infected. We don't know. And it perfectly sets up what we know Ellie is going to become for him. And I love that even though we're losing Tess, we're hopefully going to be gaining something else because Joel is.
We lost a friend, but we gained a friend. The friends we
Right.
made along the way. What are some final closing thoughts on episode 2 as we seem to have covered the scenes?
Well, did you have any thoughts on Tess's like actual final moments?
You know, it was creepy as hell that that thing went up to her and kissed her, or like infected her again, or presumably it's like a way that they infect, and it shows me that whatever I think I know about the infected, the showrunners here for the TV series are just getting started.
Right. I mean, I think the infected that approaches her senses the small infection within her and just sort of speeds up the process.
Yeah.
And the way she just sort of succumbs to that, like she knows if she runs, she's more going to be torn apart, but at least like standing through this and like succumbing to it while she tries desperately to flick her flame into
Oh, that tension.
yeah. Um I thought it was really good. Yeah, it's a little creepy, but I also thought it was really powerful.
I'll be clear, like creepy in a good way, in this time. It was like, ooh, right? Like
Right.
almost gross out. I also think like, what must that feel like to have these
Ugh.
mycelial strands? It's like not as good as a regular kiss from a non-infected person.
I
Um,
wouldn't think so.
I think that's well, I don't know. I'm also like, ooh, what if they're warm? What if they're cold? You just think about the weirdest things. Good prosthetics, good makeup design, and all that stuff. But if she had run, it would have dispersed the crowd. So she also did an incredible thing and very well thought out by luring them and keeping them there and kind of just letting them observe her and then walk closer slowly. Really kept them all in the building. There wasn't a single peep after that explosion, and I love it. They did so well by Tess in this show, even though they didn't decide to ultimately do the season one where it's just Joel and Tess in the Boston QZ and no other story happens, that I also would have liked because I like seeing explorations of these characters. I don't think that was ever on the cards. The fact that Tess has gone so soon, boo, but they did her character so well and is such a more nuanced and deeper performance by Anna Torv, and such a great character exploration that I wasn't even expecting out of this series based on what we had in the game.
She was so great. And I mean, now that we've talked about the whole episode, do we want to get into like predictions for the future and talk about maybe further spoilers from the games and stuff?
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and say that from this point forward, maybe I'll have an alarm sound. Spoiler time! This is a section of the show placed behind a spoiler warning, because, as Pedro Pascal says,
some things must stay sacred.
if you don't want to be spoiled, keep the rest of the episode sacred, and we'll see you next week. There will be some spoiler talk about where we think the show is going based on either what we have that we kept out that appeared in episode 2 that we didn't want to mention up to this point, or some of that behind the scenes stuff that we got from either YouTube, the internet, or the official sources or the unofficial sources. So big ol' spoiler warning from this point forward till the end of the show. If you will be leaving us, thank you for listening. Let's get into it.
Let's do it. So the first thing I just wanted to mention is a potential flashback. Like, what if we get more of Anna Torv talking, like maybe her and Joel meeting, or maybe not long after they've met and they've finally sort of opened up to each other, and she reveals her past traumas and Joel shares his, and they bond over shared trauma, and that's sort of the basis of their relationship. I think that would be a really good flashback.
I love it. There's no reason why they should stop looking into what made these characters these characters. In a video game, it doesn't necessarily make sense to have all these cutscenes that retread old ground or same ground or get deeper into more ancillary characters. But in a show where the audience has this emotional reaction, has seen these people on screen, you're going to want to see them again and again. And I would love if this were more like Lost or the X-Files, where one of the things that series creator of the X-Files, Chris Carter, said very early on in the 90s about the X-Files was, if you die on the show, you're not necessarily gone. And that has stayed true with any serialized storytelling. You can get actors to come back after their character has departed, whether it's in a flashback, which Lost use a lot, whether it's in ghost form, whether your character is talking beyond the grave. Any of that is fair game, and I see no reason why Anna Torv couldn't be a guest star, as she has been, on a future episode to explore her relationship with Joel, or even if it's just exploring what makes Joel Joel. I still want to know about those 20 years. I still want to know, and some of that is going to come in the form of Tommy for sure. The other thing I want to see more of, and I wanted to say this earlier, but spoilers, is Gabriel Luna as Tommy. We know Ellie and Joel will be getting to Tommy. I think it's probably guessable based on Joel's trajectory before he met Ellie in the TV series last week. But I would like to actually see more of Gabriel Luna in flashbacks so that Tommy and Joel, we can see their whole relationship before we eventually meet Tommy, which is fairly late in the game. I'd like to think isn't it like, is it just before winter, or is it even after winter that they finally get to Tommy? And so much has happened to them by that point.
I don't remember for sure, to be honest. I don't think it's quite winter.
He really sold me as Tommy, and I think that's the one sacrifice that we didn't really get to talk about Tommy at all last episode. Like it didn't come up in the right sequence, but I want to say that I loved actually his portrayal. And I think he was a fantastic Tommy. The other thing we didn't mention is that Tommy's voice actor was the radio guy.
Oh, was he?
Yeah.
Okay, that's great.
I found that it's that guy. It's the actor. I gotta when I'm rewatching, I'll be listening, for his voice, but it probably won't be the same. But that was the Tommy voice actor. And so getting
Good to
to
know.
your specific question, more flashbacks for more characters, it would be a good opportunity to focus on, I think, the early days of Joel and Tommy, especially because Marlene is coming back towards the end of the story. And in the first episode of the show, Joel blamed Marlene or said that Tommy, became infatuated with the whole Firefly cause as a result of her involvement. You could do a ton of things to showcase in flashback form some of those interactions or some of what life was like for any of these characters, and it would perfectly play alongside whatever's happening in the main story.
And I mean, to that end, you could also get more of Sarah. Nico Parker could come back and we could have more of Joel and Sarah's interactions. I mean, we already got an extended version of that from the first episode that we didn't get in the game, but I would love to see more of that as like Joel's dreaming and remembering happier times. I think that'd be really great.
Yeah.
So yeah, lots of opportunities for flashbacks to show us lots of good things, whether that's left behind content, although I think that's probably going to be happening more organically within the actual context of the normal episodes rather than the sort of start of episode flashbacks that we've gotten up to this point.
Can I talk to you about Left Behind real quick? Because I just played it today.
Yes.
Interestingly, the idea I have for this, and it's totally spoilery, so I love that it's in this section, is that Left Behind, I forgot there was a modern day component or a main game component to Left Behind. It's while she's searching for sutures to patch Joel up from his rebar incident.
Right.
That she then is getting flashbacks to her time at the mall with Riley. And so when you're playing Left Behind, it goes back and forth between the two, funnily enough, malls. They're both shopping malls that she's in. But I'm wondering if they could actually take that wholesale and put those flashbacks exactly at that point in the show. They wouldn't release it after the fact as a DLC. They could actually have her be actively thinking about Riley while she's exactly when it occurs in the DLC, and make that episode essentially a flashback episode of Ellie's that happens fairly later in the season.
Right. And, having not played the game recently, I don't remember exactly when those revelations about Riley are made from Ellie to Joel, or does that even happen in the first game? Or is that more mentioned like they've talked about it by the time we get to part 2?
That's a great question. I distinctly remember hearing it in video game Ellie's voice too, where it's like we thought it would be romantic if we lose our minds together. But I don't know if it's before they go in the sewers. I don't know if they're in a toy shop when she says it. But yeah, I think it happens in part 1. I really think it happens in part 1, but I couldn't say where.
Oh, and also something that just occurred to me, I need to reread American Dreams because I would think it would be fantastic if they put some of American Dreams in here too.
Now that you mentioned that, I am absolutely going to have to finish reading. I have I have the book of it, and I think I made it about halfway through. I liked it a lot.
Yeah.
Then got distracted.
Anyways, so getting off the flashback ideas, there was something else that I wanted to sort of predict or maybe see if we get more of. Speaking about Joel being emotionally stunted or whatever, one major part of at least the beginning of The Last of Us Part 2, and really the whole game, was the rage that these people all have for each other and their desire for vengeance. And so now that we know, or that they've sort of taken this like emotionally stunted version of Joel and put that into this adaptation, I wonder how much of that we're going to get in this season, this series, now sort of looking forward to the adaptation of Part 2, because I mean, the whole thing about Part 2 is Abby is seeking out to kill Joel because they viewed him as a monster, the way he just completely slaughters people. And so I wonder if they dig more into the actual traumatizing really terrifying aspects of Joel's personality in this, because I mean, we're not in his shoes in this game. He can be a little bit more
Yeah.
violent, and we can have that sort of a little bit of disgust for what he's doing, because we don't have to like him as we like ourselves in that same way. I mean, obviously we want to like Joel. We root for him. We root for his relationship with Ellie. We root for them to get to their destination safely. But to have him be scary in moments as well, I think would be a great way to set up an adaptation in the future for part 2.
I think that's a great point. It's definitely all about rage, and you have to, even though you're going to understand why Joel is doing what he's doing it for love. It goes back to that Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann quote about love conquering all and that being awful. Because you're going to understand. I actually got a follow-up question about this after Jeff reached out to me, my buddy Jeff, and after our first episode, and said, so explain to me a little bit more about this, Joel's decision at the end of the first game. And I've already been spoiled, but I need to understand more. And it was really just a question about Joel's kind of how the ending plays for gamers. And what I said was, you really are supposed to understand why Joel does it. But I really don't think you're supposed to agree with it. And that's the crucial disconnect that exists. Even as you're doing the thing, you get it. But as you commit more violence in the closing levels of the game, I think you are slowly becoming more horrified. And maybe there's a brilliance in how it's delayed until you finally put a name, Jerry Anderson, with the guy at the end. But, and you realize he was somebody's father. But yeah, it's gonna have to be heart-wrenching to actually see Joel on TV and Pedro Pascal becoming that monster, but they should lean in and actually make him the monster. That's 100% the more interesting choice than watering him down and having other people call him a monster, but having that not land because he's a soft, fluffy dad.
You know what I'm saying? I'm your daddy.
Right. I mean, I fully expect whenever we get to that scene in the adaptation that we're going to meet Abby for the first time. I don't think they would leave that out and save it for the future. That's my opinion. I could be wrong. I was already proven wrong about them picking up a season 2 in this first week. I didn't see anything about that at least.
Oh yeah. Well, we'll give it another week.
Yeah, it'll happen. I have no doubt. But anyways, yeah, I'm sure we'll meet Abby at some point. If for no other reason than to, yes, introduce her, but also to show that Joel's actions, even if done for love, have consequences.
I have a question for you. Why do you think Ellie knows where Detroit is?
I'm sure that geography is still taught,
but why?
This is
you don't need to know where. No, really, I'm not picking on Detroit here. You just don't need to know. Human civilization has fallen.
Yes, but I mean, counterpoint, I'm a teacher. Yes, I don't teach history or geography or that kind of thing, but isn't something that students always do is complain about the things that they don't need to know? Why am I here learning this? This isn't what I'm going to do with my life. This isn't important. I mean, you could make that same argument. It's not important. It's not like she's ever going to go visit Detroit, although maybe she will because of this. But the normal child living in the Boston quarantine zone is not going to be visiting Detroit. But what else is school going to be?
Than drills and memorization. And
right.
Was it because Joel is specifically saying, she's from Detroit. It's in Michigan. And she cuts him off. I know where that is. I'm a geography expert. I got all straight A's it's well, are they just learning where the other quarantine zones are? Because that's sort of that's my reasoning is if you're going to learn anything about the world in this post-apocalypse era, you should learn about the cities that haven't fallen yet. The ones that are actually going to...
Maybe it's significant that Joel says he's from Texas, doesn't specify Austin, but then he specifies that Tess is from Detroit because maybe that specific location within Michigan has more significance than Austin would in this present day.
That's getting deep. You want to know something else really cool?
Sure.
The video I saw earlier that was, let's see, which one was this? I think this one was the 10 things that you definitely missed about episode 1 that you never would have caught. One of them was the shirt that they perfectly recreated for Sarah of that fake band that doesn't exist had tour dates and tour locations on the back of it. Well, apparently there's been some online speculation that the locations listed on the back of Television Sarah's shirt are the locations that will be relevant in this season.
Interesting.
That
I looked up that shirt.
I
was
haven't.
watching
Yeah,
it today. was
I
like,
absolutely want to
who
get
is this?
I really want to get into looking into that discourse. Well, it's probably a Reddit thread or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, I want to know what that means because if there's Salt Lake City on there, if there's this person towards Salt Lake City, like we know it'll be pretty reasonably a good guess. But something like that where they're peppering in specific place shout outs as a form of prophecy or foreshadowing is really neat idea.
Yeah. And something I'm really looking forward to, and it seems next episode is Bill and Frank, because it seems that this is something they have, maybe I wouldn't say completely changed from the game, but the situation is completely different from the game, because obviously we know about Bill and Frank. We know that they had a relationship together, but by the time we get to Bill in the game, Frank is gone. And that does not seem to be the case in this. And so I am really just excited to see Nick Offerman as Bill, because I thought from the beginning that was spot on casting.
Yep.
But two, just to see like, how is this going to be different? Because it does not seem to be at all the same sort of situation as what we were used to. And so I'm really, really excited to see all the new things in episode 3.
I love how in Parks and Recreation, Nick Offerman is like these kind of man's man and survivalist. And I think Nick himself has written a book on several outdoorsy type subjects.
Yeah.
But I just find him to be so genial and enjoyable that I hope the Bill in the TV, even if he's a Bill who has a Frank, where the video game one didn't, I really hope they keep his irritability as it pertains to Ellie. I really want the two to annoy each other, because that is a great source of pleasure for me in the game when going through those moments. So the previews that have shown Nick Offerman have shown him to be A+, super awesome, but also a lot calmer than the way that Ellie gets under somebody's skin. And so I think it's a good challenge for Bella Ramsey to showcase how she can piss somebody off that and not suffer any consequences for it. So I'm looking most forward to seeing those moments where her attitude kind of catches even Bill by surprise.
Well, we see Bill in the game post Frank, and that probably lends a lot to his irritability. And
Yes.
so I wonder if maybe not at first he will be that way, but we'll get to witness the fall of Frank, as it were, and get to see the beginning of that for Bill and the sort of change in his character. So again, really excited about that. Again, I want to be traumatized.
Yeah, there are so many Ellie moments I loved too, and this isn't necessarily spoiler talk, but when she talks to herself briefly, she's like, "Oh, Marlene told me not to tell people my story, and now I'm going to tell the first 2 people that asked me." And she kind of just like
Right.
taps her temple a little bit, like stuff like that is just feels so natural, feels so real.
Yeah.
And of course all the F-bombs, like, "Get off me, fucker, I'm not going with you." Which I'll bleep out because this is although I did mark the podcast as explicit on Let's
I did notice that.
yeah,
like,
you did it the little E.
I promise.
You're like, what did we swear about? I thought it would be safe, because at that point it was like I needed to get off to work, and I was like, I can't make sure that I didn't miss a bleep.
Yeah.
So, awesome. Were there any final things? I know we'll be talking all this next week. I'm looking forward to all the videos that everyone else puts out, all the podcasts.
Me too. I already downloaded this week's official HBO Last of Us podcast episode, and so I'll be listening to that probably some point tomorrow.
35 minutes. I still want more out of these.
Yeah, me too. But I mean, only here on Thank You for Spore-ing can people get an episode that is longer than the episode of the show that they watched.
I feel a little bad about that. Nervous, actually, is the right word. But it's not at least the 2 hours that my other podcast, Thank You for Spieling, has typically reached. So as
Hey,
long
I
as
love
we
long podcast episodes.
Oh, great.
So
Oh,
bring
great.
it
Good.
on.
Yeah. Well, I feel like we did this in under 90 minutes, and I feel like that's a perfect length for a show that we are both so passionate about. Again, I want to thank you for your passion. And thanks for doing this with me. This was just another ton of fun getting to just geek out.
Likewise, I will continue to tune in each week to cry and to like have my heart pump out of my chest, and then to log on and drink some coffee and chat about it with you.
I love it. I love it. I love it. So again, audience, please become clickers, click subscribe, click like, click that elusive share button on this podcast if you enjoyed this, and we'll be back next week with more. Yeah, thanks for listening. Thank you, Chad, for sporing, and we'll see you next week.
Bye, everybody.